Coaching is not about filling time on a clock. We know that as coaches. But our structures often lead to the experience of agenda setting for the first 5 to 15 minutes, coaching for the middle portion of the session, and closing towards action around the last 5 to 10 minutes. Now, while that works, of course it works, it is going to create missed opportunities to capitalize on the deepest moments of learning within a coaching session. This form of coaching, which is coaching around the shifts, the changes, the aha moments in a session, is more associated with upper PCC and MCC, Master Certified Coach, levels of performance and can be very useful as an approach to action planning. Now let's talk about when this is important. When would you coach around the shift? What's changing? It's when a client is experiencing some sort of aha moment. They are being coached oftentimes maybe around something more abstract, and all of a sudden the abstraction becomes more clear. They better understand what they need to do, who they want to be, and how to communicate that. You sense some sort of change in them. And you leverage that moment for learning and action with partnership with the client. It really does come to the idea of we are not coaching the clock, but instead we are coaching the client. That's, again, very early training. However, what's so important is that as we think about coaching the clock, we are paying attention to the time as a coach. It's something that we coaches need to do for good business. But we need to focus more time, more of our attention on what is being indicated by our client. So the time is running out. We see that on the desktop computer. The hour is almost over. We have that little bit of a break, and then we have another session. I know what I need to do in this moment. I need to start closing, and that's fair. But when was the last time in a coaching session you saw the change in your client's behavior, their face, their tone, their language, and said, it's time to close. It's time to wrap things up in this cycle of coaching, or at least to offer to do so. What this means is when you see that shift, a change in tone, something that says, I've learned something. We hear this in our coaching. You should have experienced this by now, to where the person has that moment of, I've never really thought of it that way. Or they're looking up in the air and they say, we're at the shifting point. Something's clicked into place with this individual. It's time to make the most of it. So in that moment, the coach can pause, further exploration, and focus on more of a staying here and learning moment. What are you learning right now? It's often best to leverage what you've seen. Notice your tone go really quiet and you said, what are you learning right now? And so on. Whatever shift, whatever visual or audio cues you've seen or heard, bring that into the question, an observation with the question of what are you learning right now? You might explore that learning with one or two questions, but doing any further exploration may get away from that core agenda that the client had. So we want to make sure to pretty quickly tie the learning moment back to the agenda setting. So how is what you've learned here related to what you wanted out of the session? That's a very straightforward question. We can ask it a few different ways, but it's pretty straightforward. You're just connecting this dot with that dot in a question to create further learning, but now it's synthesized. It's going somewhere. And from there, as a coach, we can do, if we're coaching around the shifts, we can do one of two things. We can just go straight into, what are you going to do now that you've realized this? What do you want to make of this realization? What do you want to do with what you've learned here today? We might be at minute 20, but it's time to ask towards action. Now, the alternative, the second thing that we can do in that moment, is to ask if the person would like to explore actions. We can say, as I've heard you combine these two ideas and think about your agenda and where we are right now, I'm wondering, would you like us to make an action plan around what's come up so far? Or how close are we to wrapping this part of the conversation by looking at actions and planning? Or how close are you to being ready to talk about the decision that you wanted to make, the action you wanted to take? We can partner with them. We could go straight there. If we're coaching around the shifts, there is a legitimate learning. There is a direct connection between that learning and the original agenda. It is a very fair time to go ahead and just straight into it. Ask, what do you want to do with this learning that you've had around the agenda topic? It's a powerful way of coaching because, like I said, it can be a 20-minute session and we're in action planning that lasts maybe 5 minutes if it's efficient, and it's an hour-long session. At that point, the coach can consider repartnering, or the coach should repartner with the client around where to go next. This is where the coach can defer to them. How close are we to obtaining what you wanted out of the session? Now that we have achieved that, if they say, yeah, we're good, we've landed where I wanted to land, then we can say, now that we've achieved that, what would you like to do with the rest of our time here today? Where should we go next? How should we move forward with our conversation? So defer to them. Oftentimes in corporate sponsored coaching and executive coaching, the individual is not concerned about the time. And in fact, if they've got that learning around something very important to them, they'll say, no, I'm good. I think we're good. I'm ready to get started. Great. How would you like us to close? So that can happen. If the person has more things, then we can set up a semi-agenda. We can say, okay, so as we look at this new thing then, or this next thing, what would you like by the end of our conversation around this? And that's a new cycle of coaching. We might also ask maybe a bit more transformational or deepening questions around the agenda setting. So what makes this the next best topic for us to focus on for the rest of our time? What difference do you want our coaching to make in your life as we get into this topic, and so on? But out of all of the different elements of the agenda setting, those areas to address, I would say, are less important as you get to that second cycle of coaching after a shift. But in an hour-long session, theoretically, you could have 3, maybe even 4 of these cycles of coaching. And the distinction here is, instead of the session sounding like, okay, here's the problem, check, we got that problem done within an hour. Here's the next problem, now check, we got that done within an hour, and so on. So every single session kind of being a check that something's completed. Within a session, the learning creates this jump, this mental jump, this growth and development, this aha moment that we capitalize on, and that becomes the sense of what the coaching is all about. It's not about a time. It's about an experience. And so in this type of coaching and in this type of action planning, the client becomes more aware of the true value of coaching, because the coach is closing, wrapping, offering those connecting points right when they most matter, in the moment of awareness, in the moment of learning. Now, this is something that we're going to carry with us all throughout the rest of the training, and it's more of a preview of what's so important to be focusing on in the long term. But I wanted to put it on the table early on as something to look for. As you hear those aha moments, consider the learning, connecting the learning back to the agenda outcome, and then helping the client consider if they'd like to create an action plan around that moment. Hope this is helpful. Thank you so much for stretching yourself as a coach, and thank you for coaching.